Welcome back to all of our friends out there in the Boss Hole Transformation Nation. This is your host, John Broer, welcoming you to another installment of the Boss Hole Chronicles. Good to have you here. So glad that you're joining us because today you are going to get a chance to meet Dr. George Reed. Now, George, and he insisted that I call him George, served 27 years in the U.S. Army. And as a matter of fact, the topic of our discussion today, toxic leadership, really came from his work while in the Army as the Director of Command and Leadership Studies. That's where the whole toxic leadership research began. Just let me give you a little bit of additional background. He is currently Dean and Professor Emeritus at the University of Colorado at Colorado Springs, but he has held numerous roles both in academia and also within the nonprofit world. But we're really going to focus on his work around leadership studies and what really became the foundation of his book, which is entitled Tarnished: Toxic Leadership in the U.S. Army. And what we're going to be talking about today is not just what he learned there, but how it translates most definitely into the private sector. One other thing about George, he refers to himself as a leadership junkie, and I think that will become clear when you start to hear more of his insights and the work that he's done. He loves teaching and learning about leadership, organizational theory, behavior, and ethics. So I want you to just settle in and start to look at this topic of toxic leadership through the lens of boss hole prevention and the work that we do here at the Boss Hole Chronicles. So excited to have Dr. George Reed joining us. Let's jump in. The Boss Hole Chronicles are brought to you by Real Good Ventures, a talent optimization firm helping organizations diagnose their most critical people and execution issues with world-class analytics. Make sure to check out all the resources in the show notes and be sure to follow us and share your feedback. Enjoy today's episode. George Reed, it is so good to have you here on the Boss Hole Chronicles. Welcome.
Thank you, John. It's a great privilege. Thank you for all the good work that you do on this subject through the Boss Hole Chronicles. You're doing good work out there.
Well, we appreciate that. And there's a lot of work to do. And you know this because, we're here to talk a bit more about the research and the book that you published called Tarnished: Toxic Leadership in the U.S. Military. You and I were actually brought together by a mutual friend, Tanya McCausland from Diamond 6. And I'm really excited for our audience to hear this because toxic leadership it's kind of like a punchline sometimes. It's an overused term, and I think it can be abused, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. But your research, your background, your experience with this is absolutely something essential for our audience to hear. So before we jump in, or I think the best place to jump in would be a definition. So George, please let our audience know, what is your definition and your perspective on what toxic leadership actually is?
Thank you for that, John. It's important that we start with a definition because some of these ideas that we're working with around here around leadership are emerging.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have emerging ideas, people can talk past each other very easily. So you need to say, when I say toxic leadership, I'm talking about, because you may in your head be thinking about something entirely different.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a great start for us. For me, toxic leadership is an interpersonal style or pattern of behavior over time that has a negative impact on the climate of the organization.
Okay.
So it's a pattern of behavior over time, negative impact. Note that it's an impact-oriented definition.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a specific behavior that makes you toxic. It's not, as some would think, an abusive supervisor or a tyrannical supervisor. That certainly can lead to that negative impact that we're looking for. But there's other ways to do it as well. Like, for example, the weak leader who doesn't get engaged, doesn't address problems when they arise. The person in a leadership position who feels they must be loved by everyone. So they run from conflict and let things get out of hand. That can have a very negative impact on the organization and thus be toxic. So toxicity runs on a scale. We have all leaders sit on a spectrum,
Right.
and I like to think of a bell curve, right? So
Hmm.
you have most of us are in the middle of that curve, and that is we're pretty good most of the time. And on to the positive end, some people are just very inspiring. They're very effective all of the time. They have all the traits, characteristics, skills, and they're just masterful at positively influencing other people.
Hmm.
Uh, but there's not that many of them. So they're the far positive end of that spectrum.
Okay.
The 1% or so, let's say, that are just genius leaders.
Okay.
That would be great if we could all achieve that, but most of
Right.
us are working toward that. We're developing ourselves. We're listening to podcasts like this one. We're emulating what we have perceived to be successful, but we're not there naturally. There's not enough of those genius leaders to cover what we need to have happen in our organizations.
Right.
But I've really been interested in the other end of that bell curve as we go to the negative. We go from pretty good most of the time to not very good to bad to really bad to having a terrible impact on people that you should be helping. And they're poisonous. They destroy people. They destroy careers. They destroy organizations.
Right.
And they're the ones at the far negative end of that 1%, 2% part of the curve, and they are toxic. I believe that toxicity and leadership positions is a universal phenomenon. It's not limited to the military at all.
Right. Right. I think that's a really good distinction too, because again, while your research and your work came from this extensive military background, it is universal. We see that all the time. We have 5 years worth of documentation, documented stories and examples of where we've had horrible managers. And it's interesting. I love the idea of the bell curve, by the way, because everything we do is based on objective data. And if you look at pretty much standard deviation from the midpoint, statistically speaking, you've got, one standard deviation, that's 68% of the population. So roughly speaking, 68% of our managers are holding it together. Maybe they've got great skills. Maybe there's a natural tendency to want to develop other people. Then way over on the right, you get that, fraction. And I love that term, the genius leaders, where there's probably an element of high emotional intelligence. They've really understood what are the tools necessary to be a great leader, great developer of people. And then off on the left, now you're starting to stray into what we would call the boss hole zone. And I think it's interesting. You just used the word a little while ago, tyranny. I know in the description of the book, there is a term petty tyranny. And I think that that's really interesting because, as we like to say, nobody is born to be a boss hole. And then there are times, and I think this is where what you're talking about, where there is some intent. There is a pettiness. There's an awareness that perhaps there is a better way, but I have chosen this pathway and it is leading them into a toxic realm. Is that an accurate portrayal of this scale, if you will, on the far left side?
Yes, I think when we talk about, I like the term toxic leadership, obviously,
Yeah.
because to quote Gene Littman Bloom, and it's they're poisonous. Is it
Yes.
by poison, right?
Right. Right.
So they're destroying organizations and they're destroying people. But that's the far extreme end. There's a lot of other terms that can be used to describe this type of behavior, and if we're doing research, we have to include them all in our search terms. The
Right.
things
Right.
like ineffective leadership, destructive leadership, bad leadership, petty tyranny, abusive supervision. These are all legitimate terms.
Sure. Sure.
And as a Venn diagram, they overlap a lot. So the distinctions between them may not be as important as the general idea, which is leadership is not always a positive construct, right?
Yeah. Right.
Sometimes we want it to be. If it's nurturing and developmental and it's accomplishing organizational goals, then it's leadership.
Hmm.
But if it's destroying people and careers and having a bad impact, that's not leadership, it's something else. Well, leadership fundamentally is about influence, and influence can be used for good or for bad.
Sure. No doubt. No doubt about that. And I want to make a distinction here because toxic leadership is we have to be careful not to incorrectly assign toxic leadership to somebody that may just be having a bad day. Something something may not be going well. They may not be reacting or responding to their direct reports in a in really a positive or favorable way. And that isn't toxic leadership. We have to give There has to be a bit of grace extended when, because they're human too. Our managers, our supervisors, our leaders are still human, and so they are subject to those crappy days. So I really like that you, before we hit record, you made that distinction. It is not just about having a bad day.
Right. It's a pattern of behavior over time, and it typically is a numbers game.
Yeah.
I've had people say to me, George, how do I know if I'm a toxic leadership? How do I know if I'm a toxic leader? And I said, well, let's talk to your people. If
Hmm.
51% of them believe you are, you win or you lose. Uh,
Right.
it is not the person who has a grudge against you and wants to weaponize the term to bring you down or to foment discontent with their peers. These words can be thrown around recklessly,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
But if you look at the definition, that we're not talking about a specific behavior. We're not about one person's opinion. We're talking about impact on organization
Right.
over time. That
Right.
that can be empirically determined. It is outside of a person's intent, both leader or follower.
Hmm.
So, I think that most organizations and most people in organizations are fairly sophisticated. They know the difference between, the leader who has a bad day and the one who is malevolent, uh,
Hmm.
who, who is belittling, degrading, and humiliating people over time, right?
Right. Right. Something you said a little while ago, and it is something I have used for years when it comes to leadership development or when we're doing leadership coaching. And I always emphasize that the term leadership gets bandied about pretty easily. I mean, it's very easy to talk about, well, we want our people to be great leaders, but you just made a really key point is leadership is about influence. And one thing that I always tell maybe emerging leaders is that leadership, if you're getting into management and supervisory role or a role that constitutes leadership or influence, just remember management leadership is not a popularity contest. Because if you go in this hoping to be loved, you are going into it for the wrong reason. If you are being put in a leadership role, it's probably because you are perceived as having a degree of competence, capability, the ability to literally shepherd and guide and develop other people. But if you're doing it hoping to win friends and be popular, that's politics. That's not leadership. Sorry, it leadership is something entirely different, and it can be. We talk about the heavy weight of leadership or the mantle of leadership, and it can be a real struggle for people that aren't prepared for it.
There's been a huge debate in the leadership studies realm for many, many years. What is this thing that we're really studying?
Hmm.
Is it being in charge? Is it a role that is played? Is it management? Is leadership equal management? And I think most of us that have spent any time digging around in the works that came before us, we eventually come to the notion that leadership really is an influence process,
Right.
and it is different from management. Uh, when I was teaching at the Army War College, I was in the Department of Command, Leadership, and Management. It
Okay.
was viewed as distinctly different activities, yet frequently wrapped up under the same mantle, but very much different, and different enough that we ought to give some dedicated study to it. And what we've come to understand today is that context, that is to say, the situation that we're enmeshed in, the organizational reality, the particular purpose of the organization is also very important to consider as well. So we have leaders that we have to think about. We have followers that we have to think about. And then we have contextualized situations that we have to think about as well. And they all interact together around this notion of influence.
I don't think there is any question about the impact of toxic leadership or boss hole behavior in the workplace, whatever that workplace may be. We look at it through the lens of engagement, retention, and performance. You want to know, like you said, you want to know if a manager is doing a good job or a leader is doing a good job. Statistically, look at the engagement levels, the retention levels, and also the performance levels. But when we think about the book itself, and I'd like to jump in a little bit to the details of the book. One of the things that, in looking at the content of the book, you talk about the role of narcissism in toxic leadership. I found that fascinating. Can you just, there's so many good parts of the book, but can you dig into that a little bit more for us?
Yeah, I'm frequently asked, people come to me with their story, their experience with a toxic leader, and they're frequently surprised that they found themselves in that situation. They don't understand it. They're trying to make sense out of it. And they'll say, why did he or she act that way?
Okay.
And I always kind of caveat in the beginning by saying, I'm not a psychiatrist, and
Right.
this is the realm of psychiatry. But having waded in these waters a bit, I've come to believe that there's a combination of traits and characteristics that can come together to maybe predispose someone to treating others in these malevolent ways.
Okay.
And one of the factors at the very top of the list is narcissism. Narcissists, see themselves as the center of the universe. It's all about me and my goals, and their ethical framework is that which is good for me is good, and
Okay. Yeah.
and that's it, right? That's pretty much it. And so others are only means to an end. They're not individuals of worth to be cared for
hmm
uh, beyond how they serve themselves. So narcissism is a biggie, and a lot of work has been done around narcissism. We know what narcissists look like. We know how they think, but you want to combine that also with some Machiavellianism, and Machiavellianism is the individual who knows how things work in organizations. They understand power and systems of power, and they know how to wield that to what benefit? Not the organization's benefit,
Right.
not their subordinates' benefit, but their benefit because they're narcissists. So you get those two things sort of moving around each other, and then throw in a little bit of maybe uh, psychopathy, or this lack of emotional connection to others, inability to feel remorse. Doesn't matter what happens to others. You put those things together, and we have a real witch's brew there.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
Can be very charming. They can harness charisma. They can manage their perceptions to
Yeah.
others, especially their superiors.
Right.
So they do this kiss up and kick down activity,
hmm
and which is one of the reasons I like 360-degree feedback, because when you see these massive gulfs between how superiors see the individual and
Right.
then how subordinates see the individual, it's a little bit of a red flag there.
Oh my gosh, yes. You are making me think of so many stories. Actually, thinking of individuals too that I've experienced over my career, but we have had so many stories on the Boss Hole Chronicles where somebody says, I had the most amazing manager, and they poured themselves into the team and our development, and they moved on. And then this person was replaced by, I would say, George, by your definition, a truly toxic leader,
Mhm.
and everything blew up. And I
Yes.
mean, and again, and it wasn't like, wow, performance was down and I didn't like going into work. I mean, lives were impacted, and not in a good way. So I think that description, I think that definition is so helpful, because I believe it's incumbent upon organizations to really vet the people, we are moving into management and supervisory roles, dare I say, leadership roles, and be exceedingly raise the bar. I mean, be exceedingly picky about that because the impact is devastating if you make the wrong choice. And I want to get to we talked about it. I think we set the stage perfectly, but I'd love to hear from you. What do we do to mitigate toxic leadership? What do we do to help people survive? And these are elements within the book. We know what it looks like, but I believe it's incumbent upon our company leaders, organizational leaders, to make sure that this isn't happening, and their assessment or vetting has to be much better. And the other thing that we like to say is, again, nobody is born to be a boss hole. We may have somebody way down on the left side of that bell curve that doesn't know any better. So let's help move them out of there. And then there's the poisonous ones. They're the ones that are truly dangerous to an organization. So I'm sorry, that's a huge ask for you, but help us understand, how do we survive? How do we mitigate toxic leadership moving forward?
Oh, that's a great question. And ethically, we can't just describe a problem. We have to wrestle with it and come up
Right.
give people some good ideas. So let's say we're in an organization and I've worked with any number of companies and organizations who have found themselves in this position. They say, "Oh, that's right. We have seen the impact of toxic leaders.
Yep.
We don't like it. We don't want it here. What do we do about it? How do we address this? How do we inoculate ourselves?" Well, I will say that this is one of those organizational phenomena that you don't eradicate completely. That's almost an unrealistic expectation
Okay.
because we're not that good at screening. It's going to happen to some degree, more or less. The larger and more complex the organization, the more it's likely to happen.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
But we can do things to identify it, react to it with intention and purpose, and minimize its impact.
Right.
And so, what are some of those things? Well, part of it is having this discussion that we're
Hmm.
having right now. And that is, once you recognize a phenomenon that it could happen, you look for it and then act when you see it. So, how sensitive are your organizational detectors
Hmm.
to identify toxic leaders and then get rid of them, essentially? Now we talk about the spectrum. So as you move to the left, maybe you're not so good most of the time, or there's this gradation that takes you to toxic. And there's a lot of things that you can intervene with before you hit toxic.
Sure.
Um, Leader development, counseling, engaging, directing, doing 360-degree feedback, those types of things. But we have to agree that leadership isn't this universally positive thing.
Right.
You know, leaders are good, leaders are good. Leadership will fix it. The military has been accused of that, having this romance around leadership.
Hmm.
If the organization does well, it's because it's good leadership. If the organization does poorly, it's because it's bad leadership. If we replace the leaders, all will be well. Both of those things are incorrect because it's a whole lot more complex and practice. You can take really good people and put them in a terrible situation and they will fail
Right.
no matter how good the leadership is. Leadership will make it better, but it won't avoid the eventual outcome
Mm.
when the die is cast in that direction. So, we have to come at this thing with a more sophisticated viewpoint than just, leadership is good. I think that we have to move at some point beyond supervisor-centric evaluation.
Mm.
Now, the military is a very hierarchical organization. We put a lot of faith responsibility in our commanders. We expect commanders to command. We expect them to lead. We expect them to manage.
Right.
And how do we evaluate and promote people and put them in key positions of responsibility? Well, we look at their performance evaluations. Who writes the performance evaluations? Supervisors.
Right.
You know,
Right.
where
Yeah.
do we look at the impact on their subordinates? What is the mechanism? There needs to be mechanisms for that. Maybe it's 360-degree feedback, maybe it's climate assessments, but some way to move beyond supervisor centric only
Yes.
evaluation. because supervisors will be the last person to see that.
Right.
Right. I
Right.
mean,
Yeah.
I can't tell you that, almost every story where I'll talk to an organization that had toxics that they didn't deal with and when they should have, they will say, well, George didn't look so bad.
Yeah.
George got things done. George accomplished all of his performance metrics, these key performance metrics. He was killing it, and
Yeah.
his people were very responsive. And it's only later, too late, that they, discover that they have to put bars on the windows to keep George's people from jumping off the roof.
Yeah.
So,
I'm sorry.
so
That's not, yeah. I know that's true. That
it
is
comes
true.
late.
Yeah.
And one of my observations in the military context, and I don't think it's significantly different in other organizational types, is we have these leaders who engage in some form of misconduct.
Yes.
And then when they're caught in the misconduct, as they investigate that, they discover that they have all these culture problems, this terrible climate, these people who are truly suffering underneath that person's, influence. And that's a secondary finding, and how do we know when we're doing good at this? I think that becomes the primary finding
Yeah.
before misconduct, right? That's how you know when you're getting it right. When your detectors are picking it up and
Yes.
give you an opportunity to intervene.
I,
And one other thing,
sorry. Go ahead.
you mentioned it, so it gives me an opportunity to address it. How should they be dealt with? You discover someone who is toxic. How do you deal with them?
Hmm.
Right. And if they're truly toxic, that 1% way over there on the end where they're truly malevolent and they're really having a negative impact on people in the organization, you move fast, get
Yes.
rid of them. That's your answer. You don't have to walk on eggshells around that. If they're having a negative impact on your organization, they have to go. But not everybody is that far, and not everybody is that far gone.
Yes.
Everybody deserves some development. Everybody deserves some intervention. So, and because these people are notoriously lack insight as to the impact of their behavior, they need to be informed of that. They
Hmm.
need taught and told, and that's that very uncomfortable conversation that takes place from a superior who is dealing with a high performer, the organizational rock star, if you
Right.
will,
Right.
just going about it the wrong way and not treating people well. That person may be smart enough to be saved, and you're not going to change their personality type, but you can surely change their behavior if you're specific about it.
Well, and or even change their circumstances because weeks ago when we talked originally about, having you on the program, we have all of these different examples. We take a great individual contributor, we put them into a management role, and they're just not equipped. Maybe they really weren't built to do it. They don't desire to do it. They struggle. We kind of shove them into the boss hole zone. Maybe they demonstrate some toxic behavior, but that's on us.
Oh,
Have we taken somebody who should have been left in an individual contributor role and given an opportunity to do bigger and better individual contributor things? I mean, I think you had an example of a chemist where they did that, and I that is such an untapped opportunity for most organizations, a broad and robust individual contributor pathway, and then the pathway to management and supervisory roles or leadership roles. Well, you can still be an individual contributor and be a leader. You can have influence as an individual contributor. But if we're going to have a very narrow pathway for managers and supervisors, we just got to raise the bar, our
yeah,
expectations and our requirements of them, and even the type of person that we decide to move in that direction is probably going to look a lot different than it has traditionally. So I think there's a lot to be said for the organization's inadvertent contribution to either boss hole behavior or toxic leadership because we don't have the right systems in place. So I think that is a huge one. And one other thing, George, really quick. In our world, and you know this, that at Real Good Ventures, everything we do with our clients is based on objective data. And one of the things that we will do is go in and we will say, okay, we're going to do our it's called our employee experience survey. It's a full-blown assessment, but it creates a heat map based on departments and managers, as long as there are 5 or more responses, just to, protect anonymity. And right there, you see the problem areas. And this isn't a gotcha moment. It's an opportunity for us to go in and work specifically with a manager or supervisor and say, look, let's give you the tools and the perspective of how to avoid boss hole behavior or toxicity. And there are some that gravitate to it and receive that and say, man, these numbers are hard to read, but I'm on board. I want to get better at this. And there are others that will dismiss it. I think this is now where you're getting into the narcissism. If they will dismiss it, they will excuse it, and they will push it away. And those, I think, are the people that you're saying they shouldn't be in this role. We need to move them on quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say that everybody, well, certainly in the United States military, everybody gets an opportunity to lead.
Yeah.
Because it's an up or out system.
Yes.
You're promoted or you're in another line of work. If you don't meet your promotion gateways, your time in this organization is over.
Right.
They just move you out. So you can't stay a super technician. You're going to be in charge of other technicians in the Army.
Right.
So what that sets up is a situation where everybody has an opportunity to lead, but not everyone is cut out for it.
Right.
Not everyone can do it.
Yep.
A lot of us can learn to do it better and work very hard at that. So that's an organizational dynamic that a lot of places find they're in, where in order to be promoted, you must supervise.
Mm-hmm.
Well, your super technician over there may not be a good leader, may not be a good influencer of groups. So is there a pathway for them? That's a legitimate question.
Yep. And that's a big distinction between the military and getting out in the private sector, if you will.
Right. But even in the private sector, a lot of private sector systems in terms of paying allowances is set up so that, you hit a threshold beyond which, if you're not in charge of a group of people, you can't make the next level of pay scale.
Yeah.
And you're setting up the same situation the military finds it in.
Absolutely.
Everybody leads, but not everybody is cut out for it.
That's true. That is so true. I would love to say, George, that well, first of all, thank you for this insight, and I want to remind everybody, go to the show notes and find the book, George's book. I will also include George's information, contact information, LinkedIn profile. What would you say if somebody came to you, somebody emailed you and said, George, I heard you on the Boss Hole Chronicles. What's one thing I really need to focus on right now? If there was the lowest hanging fruit you could think of based on what you're seeing in the marketplace today, what would that be?
I would say that in terms of this issue, supervisors think we're much better at knowing what's going on in the organization than we are.
Okay.
We only see things from our perch, from our level. Reality for you, if you're in one of these higher level positions, is different from the reality of the person on the lowest rung of the organizational ladder.
Yeah.
And finding ways to break through, to move beyond your direct reports and find out what's going on in the organization, whether it's walking and talking or having conversations with trusted advisors. But we can wrap ourselves in our own perception of reality so hard that we will not find out when there is something going wrong. I mean, very wrong in our organization until too much harm has passed. So how do we do that, right? That's an imperative. That would be something I would leave people with. Never confuse what's happening in the organization with what you think is happening in the organization. You may be the last to know.
Yeah, that is so true. And you're making me laugh. This is not funny. You're making me laugh because I am thinking specifically of a CEO that I wish was on this call right now or in this interview and listening to this, because he hired, this is not a huge organization. I mean, I think they employ 400 or 500 people, but I mean, that's a sizable organization. And he hired a new senior leader that, first off, to a degree, misrepresented themselves.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to try to, their credentials, their background, sold him on what they could do. And I'm going to just, of course, no names or anything else like that. I'm going to keep this purely generic, but it's true. Came in, took over this team, and I would say demonstrated right off the bat some real boss hole behavior. Dare I say, even some toxic characteristics. And the team tried to work with this new leader. They were trying to be very transparent. Now, this is an example where this person replaced somebody else who was a very effective leader.
Mhm.
It got so bad that members of the team bypassed and went to the CEO and said, I have to tell you, these circumstances that we're experiencing are horrible, and we really need to get this fixed. He totally ignored them. And he said, I hired this person. I know what they're capable of doing. I think you're misrepresenting or misunderstanding what's going on. Every single one of those people are gone now. This started a little over a year ago. That whole team is gone. They went somewhere else. And when you talk about reality, I think there is such a disconnect. And especially when we go in and we show them the data, engagement data, psychological safety data, and it's inconsistent with how they're seeing the organization. I think that's a huge problem. And again, you made me think of that circumstance, and I agree with you. I think that is one of the biggest things organizations face today.
Well, don't be me. I've done that. I've been that guy.
Sure. We all
I was
have.
the guy who said, look, if you're on my team, you're one of my subordinates, I've got your back, so lead with confidence because
Right.
I got you. And you want them to succeed and you invest in them. And then you start getting information that they may not be leading in a way that's consistent with your organization's values.
Right.
That's dissonance. And is it just a single incident? Is it a malcontent? Is it, or is this an organizational problem that needs to be dealt with? That's
Right.
diagnosis. And what I'm advising people is don't trust your own opinion. There's other people out there that you can get information from that can help you go to work on this when it needs to be worked on.
Right. And it's not conjecture. It's not speculation or hearsay. Like you said, it's not just
It's
somebody
empirical.
It's
an empirical question.
It's not somebody having a bad day. This is something that needs addressing. Well, George, this has been absolutely great. I've been so excited about getting you on the program. And again, I want to remind and encourage our folks, go to the show notes, learn more about George's work, get the book, and understand that this is an issue that, if not addressed, we will continue to see levels of disengagement in the workplace that are, again, at an 11-year high, according to Gallup. But this has been quite a pleasure, and I appreciate all the work that you're doing.
Thank you, John. It's been a great pleasure to chat with you today. And I not only wish you the best, but all who have the temerity to talk about the Boss Hole Chronicles and get involved. There probably are kind of people in the first place because the toxics aren't interested in doing that. So my hat's off to you and your audience.
Well, we appreciate that, George. And we will see you next time on the Boss Hole Chronicles. Thanks very much for checking out this episode of the Boss Hole Chronicles. It was so good to have you here. And if you have your own Boss Hole story that you want to share with the Boss Hole Transformation Nation, just reach out. You can email us at mystory@thebossholechronicles.com. Again, mystory@thebossholechronicles.com. We'll see you next time.